Today we are looking at a passage of scripture where Jesus is giving eye exams for money. Well, hello. Thank you for joining me. So our verses of focus are Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23. We will read verses 19 through 24, and I will, for this particular passage, be reading from the King James Version. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust do corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. So am I looking for understanding of this verse? When I first read it, I was totally confused. And looking at the words, reading, no matter how long I read them over and over, I did not have what was necessary in my understanding or in my knowledge base to try to make sense of what was being said here. So I sought out this understanding, and I actually stumbled upon a very inquisitive woman who actually took up her studies in Israel of the Hebrew culture, language, and the scriptures. And her name is Lois Terberg. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's spelled Tverberg. You can look up her writing. She's actually written books on her findings as she was studying in the actual setting. And this was one of the verses that I heard her do, I guess, a teaching or a lecture on. And it was quite interesting. And it's one of the things that got me digging a little deeper into some parts of scripture. Saying this is also to help you know that I am not making this stuff up. I am praying and studying within the gifting that God has given me. I am sharing with you, hoping that you will also pray and allow God to give you the desire to hear, dig, and discover truth that is readily available. Essentially, this stuff, we could call it milk, but it's really not even milk. A lot of this has to do with grammar and culture. So this is one of those scriptures, actually. And if you already have an understanding, you know. But if you don't, hang in there a bit. So upon the reading of these verses in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 24, you can get the idea that they are not connected to each other. Basically, it could sound like Jesus is just spitting out random truths, with some parallel here or there, but that they are not really a cohesive thought. However, these verses are a part of Jesus's one thought. Jesus is here speaking about a subject that is actually timeless. A person's attachment to his or her money or possessions. He's specifically speaking about money here, but the thought can also be overlaid upon one's possessions. It is difficult to see this throughout each of these 6 verses because in expressing his point, Jesus employs the use of idioms that were familiar to his time. An idiom is an expression that comes to be understood over time because of its use. That is the last straw. Or he's just adding fuel to the fire. Or this teaching on Matthew 6 is the best thing since sliced bread. That might not be true to you. However, you do understand the expression if you are within this culture in America for any length of time, right? Because those expressions are still used, and there have been new ones to emerge since my daughter, and she's 16, since my daughter has been around. Yes, we're talking about the use of idioms here. And this is what Jesus is using because it is the vernacular, it is what is common in his time. So Jesus, after drawing attention in verse 21 to the universal fact that one's desire or one's heart will be directed towards that which one values or one's treasure. In verses 22 and 23, our key passages again says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" So keep in mind, the original language here is Greek. So now if we understand this and look at the word breakdown, we can see where the idiom comes in. The word single there in the Greek actually means simple. Simple as in with no ulterior motive. So when you compare this positive phrase, simple or single-minded or healthy, as some translations word it because of the contrast, when you look at the contrasting statement where he says, "But if thine eye be evil," so then you would have to think he's saying, if your eye is evil or bad, as some versions translate it, then your eye being single or simple would have to be the good side of it. All right, so he says, "If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." So we see that as the positive aspect. So without going into much detail here, we would just need to understand that Jesus, when he was talking, as I said earlier, was speaking in a way where those who would be hearing him would definitely understand what he was saying. That phrase, "he has an evil eye," means even today in the context of Israel in the Hebrew culture, it means that that person is greedy or stingy or miserly. You know, in contrast, when a person has a good eye, that person is willing to give of their possessions or their money, and they are generous. So they give to the poor and to the needy. So that's the understanding. And if we read these verses with that in our minds as we are reading through them, it makes a lot more sense. So having now established that Jesus is speaking using idioms here in these verses, you might be wondering if this type of idiom is used elsewhere. And sure it is. You can find this in, and I'm not going to read them here, but I will give you the passages. Matthew 20 and verse 15, Proverbs 22, verse 9, also Proverbs 23 and verse 6. So Jesus ends with a profound statement in verse 24 where he says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot, or ye in this translation, cannot serve God and mammon. Now, the word mammon is the Greek word here for money. You cannot serve God and money. It is interesting that this, again, timeless subject of a person's attachment to money and the things it can afford them here on earth was such an important part of his teaching here. The disciples he was addressing were not really wealthy. So giving them this was giving them a focus for their future, knowing what they would encounter and what they would have to endure, so that they would have their focus centered correctly and not on things here on this earth. Centering one's thoughts on one's gain, on one's earthly possessions, can change a person's thinking about life and all attached to his or her living. As a matter of fact, a misplaced connection to money, wealth, possessions, and any other thing that one can hold on to here on this earth can cause a person to believe that God does not exist. That what is important is making room for themselves to get ahead. According to Jesus' caution to his disciples, we should each be known to have a good eye. And good eye and bad eye is the way that the actual idiom is known to be phrased in the culture. So conversely, then, we should not be known as one who has a bad eye, as both will affect how we live. So this is actually how Jesus gave an eye examination for or about money. So think about this. Jesus is laying the foundation for understanding what really is important. Set your affections on things above, not on things on this earth. Any type of possession, for it will all fade and you can't take it with you. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for joining me once again as we took a look at the literal. Hope to see you next time.